Hello and welcome to a presentation on Gwen Harwood's poem Alter Ego. So, my intention for this is to take you through the key aspects to alter ego and to help you with your annotations. So, there are going to be points where I am not going to tell you exactly what the answers to my questions will be. They're designed for you to think about and to write your own ideas because I think it's really important that you come up with your own interpretation. And when you watch this and there are certain things that you really are struggling with and you don't understand, please send me an email and ask me to clarify things or explain them in a different way to help with your understanding. Okay, let's dive in. So, the poem we're looking at, as I said before, is Alter Ego. And before we have a look at this poem, I think it's really important that you understand what an alter ego is. Now, you may have heard this phrase, particularly in association with Spider-Man and Superman and Batman and uh, all sorts of superheroes. So you can, when you think about it from that perspective, you can have some idea of what an alter ego is. It is someone's, it's another self. So when we look at the Latin, we see that it means other I. And when you look at this image, you can see that alter ego explores the idea of one person being divided in two equal parts. You have the ego, the normal ordinary self, and then you have the alter ego, the other I. And some people interpret the alter ego, the other I, as a super self or as a more creative self or a more courageous self. Um, and so and in a lot of aspects of literature and psychiatry and art, people have explored this idea of what is an alter ego. But for now, I want you to understand that it really does mean means other I, and it is this idea that some people see that you are divided between the two. You are one person, but there are two selves, two parts that make up that one person. And when we look at the poem, I want you to think about what is Harwood suggesting the alter ego is, or what is she saying the alter ego is like? What's her perspective of the alter ego? Before we look at the poem, I would like you to go to our class page and download the article, A Close Contextual Reading of Gwen Harwood. For the purpose of this video, I just want you to read the first two pages. And really it's only halfway through page 43. And particularly the aspects of the modernists is really quite pertinent to this video. So before you look at the poem, I want you to read that, and that will really help with your understanding of the poem and the ideas that Harwood is seeking to explore. So hit pause, read the article, and then come back. Okay, so let's read through the poem. Have the poem in front of you. You'll find it in your Harwood booklet. Have a pen, and as we go through it, I want you to just note down your initial response, your initial thoughts. What do you notice? And it can be anything from the form, the punctuation, the words, the imagery, the rhyme, even just words that strike you or you don't understand. So really important that at the very beginning you are engaging with the poem personally. Alter ego. Who stands beside me still, nameless, indifferent to any lost or ill motion of mind or will? Whose pulse is mine? Who goes sleepless and is not spent? Mozart said he could hear a symphony complete, its changing harmonies clear plain in his inward ear, in time without extent. And this one, whom I greet, yet cannot name, or see save as light's sidelong shift, who will not answer me, knows what I was, will be, and all I am, beyond time's desolating drift. In half-light, I rehearse Mozart's cascading thirds. Light's lingering tones disperse. Music and thought reverse their flow. Beside dark roots, dry crickets call like birds that morning when I came from childhood's steady air to love like a blown flame, and learned time will reclaim or music manifest. Wait then, beside my chair, as time and music flow nightward again. I trace their questioning voices, know little but learn and go on paths of love and pain to meet you face to face. So, what did you notice that was repeated throughout the poem? A really great way to track the ideas that the poet is exploring is through trying to see what has been repeated. What ideas come up in more than one stanza? You might find that there is more than one reference to music. You might find that there's more than one reference to light and time. You might see that love has been repeated. So anything like that, and if there's a word or an idea or an image that has come up more than once, take note of that. And then you'll be able to track where that appears in the poem. And then that'll give you a little bit more insight into what the poet is seeking to say. What are the big ideas? Clearly, you can see that the alter ego is a big idea. You can see that she is exploring her inner self. She is seeking to understand her inner self. You can then see that that is a querying of her identity. It's this thirst for knowledge. But we can also see some of the big ideas are to do with creativity, the idea of music linked to creativity, which is linked to her alter ego. Some other big ideas are about childhood and memory and the movement from childhood into adulthood. And that as the speaker is sitting at her piano rehearsing Mozart's cascading thirds, memory comes to her. So maybe a big idea is the influence of memory. What else do you notice? What musical themes are being explored here? And what is she saying about the alter ego? You might want to get one colored highlighter and just highlight all the references to the alter ego. And then that will help you to get a sense of, well, what is she saying in each stanza about what the alter ego is like. Form. What do you notice about the form of the poem? You can see that the poem is split in 2 stanzas. You can see that there are 6 stanzas, and you can see that there are 6 lines in each stanza. You can see that there is a rhyme scheme. You can see that at some points there is enjambment used. And when you understand that there is a set pattern, you understand that she's utilizing her form in a particular way. So the form is then used to reinforce her message. Language. What did you notice about the language? What words stood out to you? What images stood out to you because of the word choice? It's not complex language that is being used here. Think about where the words are. Are they placed at the beginning of a line, the middle of a line, the end of the line? Are there any words that jar with you, that feel like that doesn't fit? And then make a note of that. That may be intentional by the poet. And also imagery. Look for those similes, look for the adjectives, look for where the poet is seeking to paint a picture in our mind. One image that really strikes me is in stanza 3, second line, save as light's sidelong shift. That really stands out to me. And also an image that I find that seems to not necessarily fit is in stanza 4 at the end, where it says, beside dark roots, dry crickets call like birds that morning when I came. And it's an interesting image, and it's very normal, and Howard often uses very normal images of nature and life at home, um, to capture something significant, very much like John Donne. Okay, so before we unpack the poem further, let's come back to the idea of the alter ego. So Cicero coined the phrase alter ego originally, and so he saw the alter ego as a second self, a trusted friend. So very much personified here. And we get a sense of that in this poem, particularly the trusted friend. So I'm going to go through and explore this term alter ego a little bit more. And I want you to keep thinking, is this idea being explored in the poem? Does this help me to understand the phrase, the term alter ego anymore? One's other self, intimate friend. Again, you see that you have the same as the first meaning. This second meaning builds on that, and it is unpacking the idea of it's an other self, so which implies that it's different to the first self, and it implies that there is a relationship between the ego and the alter ego by saying intimate friend. When you have a friend, when you are friends with someone, you have a relationship. When that's intimate, it means that you know each other really well. So some people see the alter ego as there is another self that is different, but the alter ego knows the ego very intimately. And then think, do I see this in the poem? Are these ideas being explored at all? And then, write some ideas down about that. Where can you see Harwood exploring that idea in the poem? When we look at the dictionary, it refers to alter ego as a person's secondary or alternative personality. So are we seeing in this poem an alternative personality? Is it distinct from a person's normal or true original personality? Is that how Harwood is using it? Let's keep thinking about this idea. Sigmund Freud referred to the alter ego as well in his own work. He saw it as this: we may most aptly describe them as cases of a splitting of the mental activities into two groups, and say that the same consciousness turns to one or the other of these groups alternately. So he sees alter ego and ego as being an idea of the conscious and the unconscious, and whether people have the mental control to be able to go from one or the other. Heinz Kohut, he saw the alter ego as being a specific need in that early phase for mirroring by another, which resulted later in what he called the twinship, or alter transference. So is the alter ego a twin of the ego? Or is it much more than that? We see the alter ego come up in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You can see here that they are the same person, but with two very distinct personalities. So we have this idea of the personality coming out in this story. And if you remember looking at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in Year 10, you'll know the significance of the alter ego here. And think about that and test it against the poem and think, well, I don't know, is Harwood exploring that idea? Probably not. And we also see the alter ego come out in the film Fight Club. Here, and as well as in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, they explore that the fighting between the ego and the alter ego. Both of these texts explore an opposition between the two. They are the same person, they are split, they are divided, but they are also at war with each other. Do we see that in the poem? And you look back and you test that theory against the poem, and you will see that you can't argue that it's there. The tone, the atmosphere, the rhythm, it is not implying that interpretation at all. It doesn't fit, does it? It doesn't feel like she's warring in opposition with herself. But there is definitely this yearning for discovery, yearning to find and to understand the alter ego. So when we think about the alter ego and Gwen Howard, think about what's Howard's perspective on the alter ego, and what are the ideas, images, metaphors, words, and motifs that she uses to describe it. And when you look at these specific aspects, then you will get more of an understanding of what she's saying. So hone in on the metaphors, hone in on the words, and even write them down separately to really get a sense of what is she saying about the alter ego. Here we have another image that I wanted to show you about the alter ego, just to reinforce this idea that a lot of people see the alter ego as being something that is more creative and more free to not follow conventions and to not follow the rules and ways of thinking and behaving, that the alter ego is often seen to be a free spirit, a creative spirit. And maybe is this what Harwood is suggesting in her poem? Now, there's another reading I'd like you to do. It is on our class page as well. It's only 2 pages, and these are just extracts that have been taken from this book called The Real and Imagined World. And I've just highlighted parts that I really want you to pay attention to, and this will really be quite helpful. So pause again and read, go to the class page, download and read the article, and then come back to this video as we're going to now unpack it in more detail. So again, keep an eye out for form and structure, language, imagery, rhythm and rhyme, and theme as a way to annotate your poem. So look at these, and particularly keep this in mind for when you're having to annotate some of the poems on your own over the holidays. So as you go through the poem, work through each of those and see what you can find. Okay, so let's look at stanza 1. You can see in this stanza that the rhyme scheme is established. A, B, A, A, C, B. You can see that the first stanza sets the style and the pattern for the rest of the poem. So what we notice is that it's written in first person, and take note of the effect of first person. First person is a very personal and intimate way of exploring an idea. So it is the speaker talking, I guess, directly to this who. So we are automatically drawn into a very personal thought that the speaker is experiencing. We also see, in terms of how the poem sounds, we see this repetition of the S's. Now, if you remember, the repetition of the S's, or the S sound, is called sibilance. And if you can look throughout the rest of the poem and just take note of all of the S's that are used, you may see that it's actually quite thoroughly incorporated all the way through the poem. Now, that could be a coincidence, but if you look at the frequency, I don't think it is. And I want you to think about what the effect is of that S sound. What type of sound is it? And why would she want to reinforce that sound? So she opens the poem with a rhetorical question. Who stands beside me still, nameless, indifferent to any lost or ill motion of mind or will? Whose pulse is mine? Who goes sleepless and is not spent? So this question is posed. Does this question get answered at the end? And that's what we need to look for. And when we know how poets write, we know that there will be an answer at the end. And so we look for that and we see what is the answer, what is the conclusion, and that will help direct your thinking. Interestingly, in Parwell's poetry, it's quite important to pay attention to tense and where the tense changes. So this first stanza starts being in present tense. So the poet, the speaker, is sharing this as it is happening. And I want you to think about the effect of having it in this way, present tense, as it's happening, as it's unfolding, and then where the tense changes in the poem and why it changes and what's the effect of that. So if you haven't already noticed, there's quite a lot of enjambment in this poem, and I want you to take note of the how it really creates the musicality in this poem. I want you to see that in some stanzas it follows the same kind of rhythmic pattern through the enjambment, and I want you to also see where the enjambment occurs between stanzas and inside stanzas. So when you read it, you follow the punctuation. The punctuation tells you when to pause and for how long. And knowing Harwood's passion for music, I then will look out for how the enjambment is used to reinforce the meter and the rhythm and the cadence of the poem. And also, when it merges from one stanza to the next, I would look and see what is happening in those lines and how is the enjambment reinforcing the content. So what is she saying here about the alter ego? We can see that she is talking in a sense to someone through that word stand. It makes it sound like there is literally someone standing next to her. Who stands beside me? And when she's using the verb stand, that's what a human does. So she's personifying the alter ego. And she's indicating that the alter ego is beside her. And I want you to take note of the positioning of the alter ego and how that idea is played with throughout the poem. What's interesting is the word still here. Now, think about the various ways that you can interpret that. Who stands beside me still can be interpreted as the alter ego is still, not moving, being quite static, passive, but it's there, the presence is there. Or could it also mean still, as in it is still there, it hasn't gone away? There's a sense of permanence. Now, you could see that maybe Harwood's saying both, which is what Harwood likes to do. She likes to have layers of meaning in her words. So think about the implications of what she's saying about the alter ego through those words. And what else does she say about the alter ego? She's saying that the alter ego is nameless. It doesn't have a specific identity. And she refers to it again in a human way through saying that the the alter ego is indifferent to any lost or ill motion of mind or will. So the implication is that the alter ego is not moved or transformed by any ill motion of mind or will. So think about what that could actually mean, why it's indifferent. Is it separate to the mind? Does that then imply that it's linked more to the heart? Is it separate to the idea of rationality? Is Harwood then making a contrast between the rational and the creative? So think about the implications of these ideas, and that will then allow you to build your interpretation. And then she talks about the alter ego saying that its pulse is mine. So then at this point, this is where she reinforces that the who is actually part of her. So up until this moment, it sounds like there is someone standing next to her, and that she could be describing a person who is next to her. But here, when she says whose pulse is mine, we now get a sense that shift of actually she's talking about something being a part of her, not separate in a physical sense. And so through that, the pulse, she's talking about sharing a body and a life and a heartbeat being the blood and bones, and she's using that metaphor of pulse to indicate that. Who goes sleepless and is not spent? So this alter ego never sleeps, and even though it doesn't sleep, it doesn't tire. So this is an untiring, fully alive presence. So what's the implication of that when we're thinking about what is she saying about this alter ego? If we see that she's talking about the alter ego being some form of creative self, is she talking about her creativity being sleepless and never spent? Is she talking about a spiritual self? Is she talking about her better self? And think about all the different ways you can interpret the alter ego. Okay, and we've looked at the meaning of still, so let's not worry about that. Here we have a contrast that Harwood is establishing. We have a contrast between who stands beside me, whose pulse is mine, and Harwood is deliberately playing with opposites and deliberately playing with this idea that it's a paradox. It can be beside her and it can also share her lifeblood at the same time. So in summing up with stanza 1, what do we notice? We notice the regular rhyme scheme, and we talked about how it can affect the rhythm and the tone of the poem. We notice that there are short flow-on lines created through the enjambment and linked by the rhyme. This repetition of sound really foregrounds the adjacent midlines in each stanza. We noted that it's in present tense, and the present tense establishes that the poet is speaking from her present position as she reflects on her life, past and present. The identity of this alter ego is pondered in different ways in each subsequent stanza. So we've highlighted some aspects in the first stanza about the alter ego. So then take note of how else the alter ego is described in the subsequent stanzas. So we can see in that first stanza, Harwood is presenting these ideas of the alter ego and the ego being divided. We get a sense that there is the conscious self that doesn't have a complete and full understanding of this other self. And that is reinforced through the question, who stands beside me? Who is this? What is this? And so we see in the beginning of this poem, there's a sense of searching for a better understanding. The alter ego and the ego are divided, and the persona in the poem longs for wholeness. To know herself fully, there needs to be a resolution between her ego and alter ego. So it's this idea of knowing herself fully. If I understand what this alter ego is, then I will better understand myself. Let's look at stanza 2. Mozart said he could hear a symphony complete, its changing harmonies clear plain in his inward ear, in time without extent. And this one, whom I greet. Again, we have the enjambment, and particularly in the last line, it is incomplete and it's meant to run on into the next stanza, so that those stanzas, even though visually are disconnected, they are connected through that line. It flows from one to the next. There is no break, no pause. So look at where else that occurs, what's being said, and it's that deliberate linking that Harwood is playing with. So she's playing with the form. She's being a bit more experimental, as opposed to her sonnets, where she reinforces that traditional meter and traditional style of form to some extent. Here we can see that through the musicality, she's being more playful and more musical in the way that she sets out her poem, which is important because music is such a big motif in the poem. So this full stop occurs not at the end of the stanza. So like what I said, it's in some places the full stop occurs at the end of stanzas, and in some places it doesn't. And so again, the pausing occurs at various points. And why is that? Why is there a pause there? What is the effect of that? So Mozart establishes a clear musical illusion, and Harwood uses allusions to famous people in order to say something more about her ideas. So she's, by making a reference to Mozart, she's assuming that we understand who Mozart is and all of the ideas that we have about Mozart, that she's drawing on our understanding. So Mozart said he could hear a symphony complete. So note that word, complete. Its changing harmonies clear, plain in his inward ear, in time without extent. So the idea of a symphony, think about the meaning of symphony being a instrumental composition. It's got several parts. And often symphonies, the word symphony is used to refer to anything with a rich combination of parts. For example, a symphony of colours. So she's playing on that word symphony. So yes, Mozart could hear, he could perceive the several combination of parts. He could, and is she then drawing on the idea that Mozart was able to understand all of the complexities and he could draw them all together and he could be complete? And she's saying that because she feels like she can't. She is not complete. The symphony of her life is not complete, and she can't perceive the symphony like Mozart can. And again, that idea is reinforced with that reference to harmonies. And another musical term that is referring to the consistent, orderly, or pleasing arrangement of parts. Again, many parts put together in a pleasing and orderly and consistent way. Is this a comparison that she's making between Mozart's ability and her own? in time, he is able to keep these different complexities in time. And it's also, he could hear it clear, plain. Okay, he could hear the symphony complete. He could hear its changing harmonies clear and plain. He was able to do it in his inward. And I think the word inward is quite important. And I think she's saying it more, she's not talking about the way that he could hear something with his ear. I think she's talking more about his alter ego, his genius, in his creative genius, that his creative genius could hear these things without time, without any other assistance. He could do it. Thinking about these words, complete, clear, and plain, and what those ideas could mean. How do they add to the meaning of this stanza? She uses this connective here to link the ideas of Mozart to her own experience. So by seeing that connective, we know that she's deliberately using that musical illusion as a metaphor for her own experience. And by also having that line as part of this stanza, we can see that we're meant to contrast those ideas of Mozart and this one. This one, who she greets. Okay, that's really interesting word choice here. So again, by saying this one, she's reinforcing the idea that the alter ego is nameless, but she reinforces this love and intimacy and appreciation for her alter ego by saying that she greets it. Okay, when you greet something, it's because you're happy to see it. You're welcoming it. So she is welcoming this alter ego, despite the fact that she feels it is nameless, and she can't quite work out exactly what it is. So in stanza 2, what do we notice? We notice that the musical metaphor is established, and think about what it does. Why is she using a music metaphor? How does that add to the meaning? As I said before, there is a comparison made between Mozart. His alter ego wasn't a friend he relied on, but an intimate inner self within him. So it wasn't a separate being. So she refers to her alter ego as something that stands beside her. It is separate to her. And she compares it to Mozart, who had it inside. It was an inner, in him, an intimate inner self. And so when we can read between the lines here, we can see that that's what she wants. She doesn't want her alter ego to be standing beside her, separate. She wants to have that intimate inner self that is within, and then she will feel complete. Interestingly, when you look at these linking of terms, you see in stanza 1, there's lines 3 and 4 end rhyme ill and will. And when you look at stanza 2, again, lines 3 and 4, clear ear. And if you see, there is a pattern that is established. Ill will, clear ear, me, be, disperse, reverse, flame, reclaim, no, go. These words add another meaning. And when I see these, I feel like these words are placed there because they are reinforcing the message of each stanza. And I think that is just so clever. Right, we're going to stop there. And this will be the end of part 1 for this video. If you would like to continue with this, and if you want me to keep going through the rest of the poem, just let me know. Send me an email and ask me to do part 2. I will try and do part 2 soon, but I guess if I know that you would really like it and you found it useful, then I will be quicker at getting it done. Um, so if you found it useful and if you'd like me to continue, send me an email and let me know. And if I don't hear anything, then I'm assuming that you're all good and you don't need any more. Thanks for listening.